Hey everybody, ahoy. It is Tuesday afternoon and we are back with the adventure prep stream. Please let me know if you can see me and hear me okay. There's always a little hiccup right at the beginning as I get my setup figured out, so it'll take a second to resync. How is everybody doing? Welcome. It's Tuesday. I'm excited to dive in. We haven't done like this setup, this overlay for adventure prep in a while, so apologies. I think I have a way to keep the text from being off center, which is what it used to be all the time. I would always be scrolled to the wrong place. I think I've got it figured out now, but let me know if you at any point while we're working can't read it. Ahoy, David. How you doing? Thanks for coming, my man. Yeah, we're just doing some prep today. So I am up to my neck in new campaigns. I have started 3 new games in the past month, which I think brings my total to... Boy, let's do it. Let's count out the total. So, okay, I've got Secrets of Sharn. I've got Battle Bards. I've got Mansionscape. I've got North Trembles. I've got now I've got 3 new ones. So I've got Hand of Doom. I've got Ravenloft. I've got Theros, and then I've got a home game. So I'm running 8 games right now. 8. Regular games, not including, one-off adventures or camps or anything like that. Tired, ready to leave work. That is how I feel whenever I go to work, David. I definitely feel that soon. How much longer do you have? I imagine you're pretty close to being done, right? If you're Central Time, pretty soon, I would imagine. So yeah, I'm running 8 games right now, and I just picked up 3. So I was running 5, and now I'm running 8. And that's the most games I can run. So unfortunately, I can no longer take any more clients at this time. But here's the deal is that... what's up, Grant? Yes, I am running a Theros game. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about today, unfortunately, because I have that one pretty well figured out. But the kids voted. They picked Mythic Odyssey, so we're running a Theros game. Today, we're talking about Ravenloft, the other game that my kids voted for. So yeah, I started 3 new campaigns with kids. One of them voted for Epic Fantasy, because of course they did. But they'd never played before, so it kind of makes sense to start with the basics. One of them voted for Mythic Odyssey, and so I'm running a Theros game. Heavily mediated. It's pretty different already. David says he might leave in 30 minutes if you can get a few things done. Yeah, dude, go for it. Don't let me distract you. Like, obviously, I'd love to have you here, but, get your work done. So I've got that, and we'll probably end up doing a stream about that sooner rather than later. But then I've also got a Ravenloft game that the kids voted for. 8 games is a lot. I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong. Like, I used to think running 2 games was like, oh man, right? In all fairness, a lot of these games don't meet. Like, only one of those games is weekly, right? One of them is monthly. But it's a lot of bi-weekly stuff, right? So most. Oh no, it's 9. I forgot about Wild Green Yonder. I think it's 9. Hold on, let me recount them again. Sharn, Battle Bards, Mansionscape, Wild Green Yonder, North Trembles. Yeah, and then my 3 new ones. So if you count my personal game, that's 10. Or that's 9. Whoops. 9. But yeah, we're talking about Ravenloft. So I was an idiot where I did this thing where I thought, like, okay, I will pitch them on established campaigns that already exist, right? So I was planning on doing for my epic fantasy game on Saturdays, I was planning on doing Rise of Tiamat or Tyranny of Dragons, right? But then as they were discussing their backstories, that didn't really make narrative sense. Like, the ideas they came up with and the story they wanted to tell didn't really make sense in that context. So I found myself being like, well, is there another adventure? Sure, there's Red Hand of Doom. Let's look at that. And now I'm kind of porting over Red Hand of Doom, but really I'm just doing a campaign from scratch, right? Like, I'm using some things from Red Hand of Doom, like Hobgoblin Army and the map of the Elsir Vale, but for the most part, it's just like a unique campaign. And then I thought the same thing. Thanks, Grant. And then I thought the same thing too about Theros, but then I realized Theros doesn't have a campaign. It's just the setting and one adventure. And I'm kind of basing that campaign off that starting adventure, but I read it and I was immediately like, well, I don't like half of this, so I guess I'm doing another bespoke campaign. And then Ravenloft, I thought, oh, we'll just do Curse of Strahd, because I know Curse of Strahd. I can run Curse of Strahd like the back of my hand. And then 2 of the kids who voted for it had already played Curse of Strahd. So now it was like, okay, well, we can't do that. We got to do something different. I'm like, well, Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is out. Let me look at that. And I was looking at it, and it didn't quite fit what I wanted. And so I am once again running bespoke campaigns for all 9 of these games, which, I mean, like, some of them are based on published settings, right? Like, Wild Green Yonder is pretty much Witchlight at this point. North Trembles is pretty much Storm King's Thunder. And then, you know, Theros, pretty much, Ravenloft is going to be wholly unique too. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the premise for this Ravenloft game, which I think is really cool, actually. Like, I would love to run this game in another context. I mean, I'm excited to run it now, but the difficulty is that, you know, it's just adding more work to the workload when I could have just run Curse of Strahd and run it straight out of the book. But that's okay. I think this is going to be cool. So let's talk really quickly about our characters. So in setting up this Ravenloft campaign, I allowed the players to choose any of the 3 ancestries presented in Von Richten's guide. And so I had 2 of them pick Dampier, which I never know if that's how you say it. Dampier? I don't know. Obviously it's vampire, right? But like, it's vampire? I don't know. But we're saying Dampier is what we've been saying. Otherwise, maybe Dahampier. I'm not sure. We have 2 Dampier, and then we have like one of them is a warlock, one of them is a barbarian, and then we have a half-elf cleric, and we have a tiefling bard. And so the idea here is that all of these characters. This is what I kind of do for my starting hook into Curse of Strahd. Is I say that each character owes some favor to Von Richton. Von Richton is my favorite Ravenloft character. I love the idea of the ends justify the means, kind of Odin-esque good guy who is trying to defeat evil, but in so doing does a bunch of really shady, dishonorable shit. Like, I love that character. I love the idea of having to be allied with him and then not really knowing if you can trust him at any given moment. I think that characterization came largely from, and dyslexic, so all my campaigns are homebrew. A lot of work. But what was I going to say? I was going to say something, and then I lost it. Also, welcome, Nuker Wolf. Thanks for coming. Kind of, I think my interpretation of that character comes from Chris Perkins's interpretation of him in Dice Camera Action, which I watched for years before it got canceled. So the idea of him as this, like, kind of Professor Xavier, Odin-style wise mentor character who does a bunch of shady shit over the course of their career in the furtherance of good, you know, it's the ends justify the means kind of thing. I really like that character archetype. I like how it makes you feel. I like how players are like, especially in Barovia, where like your allies are few and far between, and so you can't really turn away from a potential ally. You've got the Mardikovs and you've got Von Richten, and that's about it. I guess Esmeralda, but Esmeralda's kind of wrapped up in Von Richten's little sphere of influence. So I liked all of that stuff, right? And I like him as a character, and I always like to center him in the Curse of Strahd campaigns that I run, the Ravenloft games that I run. So the idea is each one of these characters owes a favor to Von Richten, in some capacity. Usually that favor takes the form of a service that Von Richten has done for them. Usually it's like, you know, he slew a monster, or he exorcised a demon, or he did whatever. And that's pretty much true of what we're seeing here. What's interesting is that we have 2 Dampier characters that have favors owed to Von Richten, which I love that idea, right? That, like, he's not even above working with a vampire if it helps him take down a bigger threat. So we have Balthazar, who is a male Dampier warlock. He's a hexblade, and the idea is that he was an urchin, and he was preyed on by this vampire, and then it turned him into a vampire, and in order to try to get rid of this effect, he turned to something else. He turned to this warlock patron. He's a hexblade, so it's got to be some kind of a sword, right? Some kind of a weapon. And that's his patron. So now he's got those 2 things. But it was ultimately Von Richten who slew the vampire that, you know, had control over Balthazar, and so thereby freeing him. And then we have Yvonne, who is kind of similar. They're sort of related. Yvonne's player is a little bit of a coattailer. Like he tends to like glom onto other characters and say, yeah, I want to do that too. So when Balthazar said he wanted to be a Dampier, Yvonne was like, yeah, I'm also going to be a Dampier. And then Balthazar was like, I'm going to be a Warlock. And Yvonne almost said he was going to be a Warlock. He wanted to originally go to Sorcerer. And I kind of said, okay, guys, these characters are very similar. What if we did something a little different with Yvonne? But yeah, he's like a, he's an urchin, and he's basically like, I forget the exact context. Let me see if I can pull up the notes that I took during the session. But I remember it not being particularly strong of a backstory. Let me see if I have this down. Yvonne. I see. Yeah, Yvonne stole an Eldritch. This actually isn't too bad. I also gave them all haunts, which are the like the weird haunted one backstory things. I let them all pick one to give themselves inspiration, and they all did, which is cool. The other interesting thing about this campaign is that all of the players are kids, and they picked this. They picked spooky content. I sent the lines and veils to the parents and everything, but I did kind of say like, hey, you know, it'll definitely be PG rated, but it is a little spookier in tone. You know what I mean? So like, just be advised that this is the deal, right? So Yvonne's story is that he stole a book from a vampire, and he saw things in the book he wasn't meant to see. The vampire then recaptured him and recaptured the book, turned him into a vampire, and then Van Richton wanted the book, and so he came and he stole the book back and then freed Yvonne as well. And so now Yvonne also owes him a favor. Dargos Drozkoi, I think, is probably my favorite character of the party, although Griffin's pretty cool too. This is a half-elf cleric. He's a noble. And the idea is that Van Richton, that like it's one of the old money families of this big kind of gothic city. And the notion is that Van Richton was brought in as a consultant to dispel this ghost that has haunted everyone of the family, like every scion of the family's apparition. But he's like, they're devoted to an evil god, and it's very much like a sinister spoiled like rich kid, kind of dabbling in the occult. Nuker Wolf asks, any advice with dealing with those "oh cool, me too" players? That's a great question. I haven't really figured it out in terms of the best way to deal with them. I'm kind of direct with my confrontation of Yvonne's player about it, because he's done it in the past before, and like I don't think he means anything by it. He's a child, right? So like he doesn't necessarily have the same kind of like thinking on his feet thing. He's a great player, but when it comes to coming up with ideas or character concepts, he tends to kind of follow the pattern, which is fine. But you do sometimes have to get him not to just piggyback on other people's skills and ideas, right? So often what I will do is I will, in the case of like skills, I'll say things like, in his games in particular, I make a specific point about like, I need one person to roll survival, right? So that way he can't be like, oh, I'll try that too, right? It's like once somebody tries to persuade the Duke, then nobody else can, right? You have to try a different tactic. You have to do something else. You can't just constantly piggyback off that same thing. I also try to reward characters who have their own ideas with inspiration or kind of praise, right? So some of it is just verbal tics and things like that, and how you respond. Like, okay, yeah, I guess you could do that. Small things like that to kind of send a message to the player that like what's rewarded more in the game are you know, creative problem solving and playing your own character rather than piggybacking off of other people. But no, Nuker Wolf, I've not solved that problem exactly. It's a lot of subtlety right now, and because he's a kid, you can't really like it's tougher to confront him as an adult because he's not necessarily responsible for a lot of his actions because he's a child, right? Like he's not consciously thinking, oh, this is what I want to do. That's just how he behaves. So it adds another layer of complexity to it as well. But it's a good question. What kind of problems do you have with the Nuker Wolf? Feel free to tell me about it in the chat. And then lastly, we have Griffin Von Richton, who is a tiefling bard. And the idea with Griffin is that I actually really like this backstory too. Griffin was an urchin and a child and was raised in an orphanage. And then at some point in their youth was possessed by a demon. And Van Richton was called in, and he exorcised the demon. But the demon, in the process of possessing the child, transformed them into a tiefling. So the reason they look like a tiefling is because they were possessed by this demon, right? That's one of the fun things about games like this, is you get to determine, like, what are the rules of our world in Session 0? How do tieflings work? maybe there are other kinds of tieflings, but I like the idea of that being in this version of Ravenloft. A tiefling is a person who at some point was possessed by a fiend, and then that was pushed out of them, right? Maybe the fiend is still there. Maybe the fiend has been, shuttered away. Maybe the fiend was driven out, but like there's permanent effects left on the body. But then the reason that they're Griffin Von Richton is that Van Richton then adopted the child and took them on as their ward. And so they kind of were his apprentice and followed him around for a while. And whether they still are or not, I don't think we officially decided. But they're a bard, and they're like not necessarily, Van Richton's greatest apprentice. They asked me a fun question at one point. They were like, is this something that he does? Like he just picks up random orphans? And I was like, I think that he has had apprentices in the past, but he doesn't talk about them. And like he shuts down any attempt to talk about them. The implication that you get is that something bad happened to a previous apprentice or potentially previous apprentices. And there's kind of this, like, at a certain point, you're going to run into whatever it was that happened. Like, were they killed in some sort of a tragedy? Were they expendable to Van Richton? This is always the kind of tension around his character. Okay, cool. But let's talk about the campaign's plot summary. So I was thinking about the idea of doing, like, based on how they were all interrelated, orphans and connected to the same orphanage or living in the same city. Like, it felt like it was a much more urban story than your kind of typical Curse of Strahd, like Carpathian Mountain adventure, right? It felt more like a Victorian London, the main action of Dracula, right, where it's taking place in London with this monster. And so I was thinking about like the show Penny Dreadful, and I was thinking about other kind of hey, what's up, Kirk? Thanks for coming. Yeah, honestly, Kirk, that was exactly what I was thinking. Kirk says, sounds a bit like Batman and the Robins. Precisely, right? That, like, Griffin is, I'm going to get them mixed up. Oh, no. Batman stans are going to be angry, but it's, I know there's 3. There's Dick Grayson's the first one, right? He becomes Nightwing. And then is it Tim Drake is the middle one? Who then, like, dies, but then becomes Red Hood. I guess these are Batman spoilers for, like, 30-year-old comics. Who's the youngest one? Who's, like, the good one after the second Robin? But yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, Kirk. I think that was in the back of my head, was Batman and his various Robins. Although I think, like, Van Richton is a lot less morally good than Batman. Though I think you can make a compelling case that Batman is not that morally good. But yes, that's where I'm at. If anyone can list those 3 Robins for me, because like Cassandra Cain gets in there at some point too, right? There's a bunch of Batgirls, and things like that, and Barbara Gordon, but I forget who. There's a third Robin, Jason Todd. He's the middle one, and then Tim Drake's the third one, right? So it's Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, and Tim Drake. Yes, is that right? Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate it. Tim Drake is the youngest. Yes. Damian Wayne is in there too, Grant, as well. This is the problem. There's so many. Then there's Damian Wayne. And then he becomes, because then I think Dick Grayson at one point becomes Batman again. Man, this is, okay, we're off topic. But yes, that's exactly right. Thank you, guys. So right, in this analogy, Griffin Van Richton is Tim Drake, right? He's like the youngest one. Maybe, and then Esmeralda is probably Dick Grayson, but I like the implication that there's a Jason Todd in there, that something happened with a previous apprentice, and we don't talk about it. Cool. So the concept here was to base it more on like a Victorian London horror, more of a Jekyll Hyde, Frankenstein, I guess isn't actually in London, but that kind of more of an urban story. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to set it in a domain of dread that wasn't Barovia. So I went looking through the domains of dread in Von Richton's guide, and there are some that are cities for sure. Dementlieu, I think, is one. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. My wife, if she were here, would fly into a rage at me butchering what I think is meant to be a French pronunciation. But that one is much more about like fairy tales and stuff. Like none of the ones that I found really grabbed me in terms of like having that kind of like Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dorian Gray, Penny Dreadful kind of a vibe. And so I ended up coming up with one of my own. I pulled the name, I think, from a clan of vampires in Damian Wayne that's the name of the guy. He's the son of Batman and Ra's al Ghul's daughter. Yeah. But I think I plucked it from one of the vampire clans in Innistrad, which is the magic setting. I really liked Falcon, Falken. I like that it's like the word falcon, but spelt weird, and Falcon, and it feels very gothic. So I plucked that name out, and the idea is that it is just kind of your fog-choked Jack the Ripper, kind of Victorian horror city. Like that's sort of the tone of the Domain of Dread. So again, very classic stage coaches, right, in top hats and some of that thing. You still have, sort of medieval level technology. Maybe there's some gunpowder weapons, but I like the idea that it's this kind of arch Victorian turn of the century kind of tone. And so here's let me run through the basic idea. I talked this with my wife the other day, but there's a lot that still needs to be like hammered out. So the city of Falcon used to be a domain of dread, and it was under the sway of a Dark Lord. As all the domains of dread are, there's some Dark Lord who is imprisoned there by the dark powers and is forced to like perpetually relive their torment, whatever it is, right? I'm not sure who it is right now. Von Richton, famous vampire hunter, comes to Falcon, and maybe he was once a resident of the plane. I kind of like that idea that like rather than him being from Darkon, he's from Falcon, and he ends up. You could do a thing where he's like born in Falcon and like born under the tutelage of this, born under the not tutelage, born under the like the umbrella of this Dark Lord. Maybe the Dark Lord does something to him. Maybe it kills his family or whatever. He has some reason to have a grudge against the Dark Lord. He teams up with the Vistani to escape, and he goes out and he does a Batman, right? If we're going to make a Batman comparison. He goes out into the world, and he learns to become a vampire hunter, and he's reading, and he becomes a priest of the Morning Lord and all this stuff. And then as an adult man, he comes back to Falcon, and he defeats the Vampire Lord, or the Dark Lord. He slays them, drives them away, seemingly vanquishes them. And, the darkness lifts and the mists peel away, and Falcon is restored to its original state, whatever had happened to the city. And then he retires and he sets up shop there, right? Hey, what's up, Hunter? Thanks for coming. Oh, it's so lovely to see you. Hunter says, just wanted to say what's up. Love XP points. Glad to see you're doing this. This is fun. Hey, you're fun. I love you, Hunter Fox. Thanks for coming and hanging out. What a great chat we're having right now in the middle of the day. Thanks for coming. Great. So the idea then is that he retires to Falcon and he stays there and he sets up his manor. And then this is probably where a bunch of the player characters' backstory stuff happens. Like there's still a lot of evil in the city, even if the Dark Lord has been dethroned or whatever. A lot of it sinks into the underbelly of the city, right? But it's never entirely extinguished. So he spends a decade or so running around Falcon and, exterminating monsters and driving out demons and rescuing people and, like, fighting whatever remnants of the Dark Lord's power is still kind of in the shadows. And then at a certain point, he feels like he's done it, right? Like he successfully kind of cleansed the realm, if it were. And then, as he's an older man, he starts to become... thank you, Hunter. He starts to become more obsessed and worried and concerned that maybe the darkness hasn't fully been extinguished, right? He becomes convinced that there's this new Dark Lord. And the signs of it are there, right? The mists start to creep in to the corners of the city. The sun stops rising. It kind of becomes this eternal night. And he becomes convinced, with some evidence that there's a new Dark Lord. And so he goes even more on like a fervent hunt to try to track them down. The monsters once defeated are again on the rise. And so that's kind of where the campaign begins, is that the party is like summoned to his estate by some of his allies. Probably will pull the Martikovs out of Barovia and put them here. I always liked him being kind of teamed up with the Were-Ravens. I ran a similar adventure to this a couple of months ago, last year, for a client that wanted to try D&D, and they didn't end up doing more than kind of a 3-shot. But it was basically taking the House of the Raven from Candlekeep Mysteries and then doing it as a prologue to Barovia. That, like, the Shadow Crossing in House of the Raven led to, not to the Shadowfell, but specifically to Barovia. And we took that manor, and I said, this is the Von Richton estate. And he summons you here, and turns out he's been abducted and dragged into the portal. So what I think I can do is I think I can take that adventure. I'd have to reskin it a little bit and recontextualize it, but take the House of the Raven, the version of it that I did for that one-off, and I can basically plop it into this new city of Falcon. And I can say that, like, we start with the characters being summoned to the estate. Something has gone wrong. These ravens have observed something, like maybe he's been attacked. You know, the house is trashed. Something happened here. There was some kind of an incident in the house. And because the ravens can't really communicate with you, they maybe have information that the party doesn't quite understand. And so the first kind of adventure is them going through Von Richton's estate, his, like, manor house in the city. And it kind of reveals what sort of a man he is, right? You see his crazy specimens, and you see, you know, all of his traps and paranoias and things like that all over the place. You see the kind of man he's had to become in order to overthrow the Dark Lord and in order to purge the city of all of its darkness. Oh yeah, that's cool. Death House is the transition point. You know, I thought about that, but Death House, like, didn't quite have the, I think, oh yeah, that was what it was. The player... One of the guy who had hired me had already like read Death House. He'd read it from cover to cover, and so I was like, "Oh, okay, crap. I need another version," because that's what I would have done. Is I would have used Death House, but I was like, "All right, what's another spooky one?" Yeah, House of the Raven. Here's what I'll say, Hunter Fox. It is not bad at all. It's a little bit flat. I had to really spice it up because House of the Raven isn't about Von Richton at all. It's like a different group of were-ravens. And it's cool. It's a Chris Perkins adventure, so there's a lot of great detail in it. But I found it was a little lacking in actual drama. So go check it out. I mean, it's definitely worth a read. But I really had to do a lot of work to, like, buttress it as an inciting incident for a campaign, I should say. You know, as like a little small mystery, I think it's probably great. But for my purposes, I really had to kind of gut the place and start over. And if anything, I think that adventure was initially too complicated. There was, like, too much going on, especially for new players. Like, Baba Lysaga was involved, and there were scarecrows, and there was, like, Von Richton's father was, like, imprisoned in the basement. There was a lot that I added, which was cool, but probably overwhelming for the players at the time. Anyway, so the idea is that they're summoned there, and they discover that something has happened. The place has been kind of torn apart, but the more they search, the more they look. Maybe they fight a couple of creatures that have escaped, you know, from Von Richton's, like, he's got, you know, an intellect devourer in a jar, and he's got a Varg wheel in a cage, and, you know, some of that stuff, right? And because they're low-level characters, they can kind of fight some of those and get a little bit of experience that way. But what they eventually discover is that Von Richton wasn't attacked. He just kind of, like, in a crazy flurry, grabbed everything and fled to a secret hideout that he has. He has, like, a bunker somewhere. If this is, you know, Von Richton's house, this is where he lives, then of course he has to have a safe house someplace that he goes into hiding at. So it's kind of about realizing that the it's almost like a little sub theme here, that the monster isn't anything external, it's something internal. That Von Richton is the one who's kind of tossed his place, right, in this sort of fear and paranoia. I made a note here that, like, the party then has to go track down the secret hideout, and maybe, like, on the way or en route, they are attacked by vampires. I came up with the term the Sanguinoi, which I think is kind of cool. You know, but the idea is that it's like an ancient vampiric order. You know, it's not one vampire, it's like a coven of them or whatever, and they're called the Sanguinoi because that's cool and bloody and weird. And they attack the party. Meanwhile, they end up locating Von Richton in his hidden bunker, and he tells them all about the Sanguinoi and that they must be the key to this mystery and that their matriarch is the new Dark Lord. Right? And so that kind of seems like, all right, great, well, let's go fight this coven of vampires. And that's kind of the opening adventure. But the twist is, the reason I think this is cool and why I'm really excited to run this, like, that all seems fine and interesting, whatever. But the big twist, of course, is that once the party goes and fights the Sanguinoi and defeats them, you learn that the Sanguinoi are not the Dark Lord. That whoever is leading them is, like, actually trying to stop this Dark Lord from rising, right? And they have some wrong idea about it. You go back to Von Richton, he's like, oh, actually, it's these werewolves, right? There's this pack lord who's like yeah, very masquerade, for sure. Who is, like, you know, gathering power in the city. And you go fight werewolves for a little while, okay? But they're also not the Dark Lord. You kill the leader of the werewolves, and the place is still enshrouded in mist. And then, okay, well, what if it's this coven of hags that Von Richton has just uncovered? Okay, let's go fight the coven of hags. And we defeat them, and, like, they're not the Dark Lord either. And it slowly begins to dawn on the party that this inquisitorial mindset, right, all of the witch hunts and the posted rewards and the silver and the holy water, right, that the Dark Lord is Von Richton. that because Von Richton slew the previous Dark Lord, now there's this power vacuum, right? And rather than an old Dark Lord coming back to the throne, it's chosen him as the new Dark Lord, and it becomes about, surveillance, and it becomes about control, and he has purged the city of all of these evil creatures, right? That, like, it's almost like I think it's the heretic, maybe, is the term in Darkest Dungeon for the, like, scary vampire hunter character who's antagonistic towards you, right? He's the villain. Kind of like Abraham Von Helsing gone mad. Like, the idea of Von Richton's paranoia and, conviction just tipping him over the edge and transforming him into the Dark Lord. And if he's a Dark Lord, then, what is his imprisonment? It's that he's constantly hunting this monster that he'll never catch, right? Maybe you could do a thing about it being like, people that he loves are constantly being taken from him, which is a classic. Yeah, exactly, Hunter Fox. He has become the monster. Like, what is more gothic than that, right? What is more gothic than, like, oh no, it turns out the monster was me? So I really like it. I think it's cool. It centers Von Richton, and it really leans into you think he's a good guy. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? His intentions were good, but look at where they led him. All that stuff. So I really like this theme. I think that's fun. And you're exactly right, Kirk, is that it has some Jekyll and Hyde vibes as well, right? That, like, he almost isn't aware of the things that he's doing, right? There's, like, sort of two sides to him. And so I'm really jazzed about this. I think it's cool. It will probably fall on deaf ears with these kids. Like, I mean, they'll understand it, but, like, a lot of the bigger themes probably won't be explored. But then once I make the game, I can, run the game for other people. So that's the premise. It took me 30 minutes to explain it, so I apologize. But what I'd like to do today, I feel pretty okay about the actual adventure itself. Like, I feel like I can take the mansion and reskin it without too much difficulty. What I would love to do is I would love to talk about Falcon, the city. I would love to talk about its history. I would love to talk about, like, the factions and the neighborhoods. And, like, if this is going to be the place where they are the entire time, it really has to feel like a living, breathing, organic place. So if y'all are down, I would love to just kind of, like, hash this location out and figure out, like, who was the previous Dark Lord and what was their deal and how did Von Richton defeat them and, like, where are they now? Are they actually defeated? Who were the factions? What, like, who's kind of taken over in that power vacuum? What are they doing? Who are the Sanguinoi? Who are these hags? Who are these werewolves? Who are the other people that are kind of running around? We can talk about character backstories. We can do all kinds of stuff. So if that's cool with you guys, I would love to dive into that stuff and spend maybe, you got about an hour and a half? Yeah, I bet we can get some good work done. So Falcon, it is a domain of dread. We know that much, right? That's about all we know. Domain of dread. Again, please let me know if you can't read what I have typed. It's such a small little box, so it sometimes gets me in trouble. It should be okay, but let me know if I ever scroll past it. It's a massive urban sprawl. Victorian London vibes. I'm seeing, like, smoke from chimneys, carriages, wet cobblestones, like cobblestone streets, right? Like, what are those called? Hansom cabs, things like that. Like, it has this kind of ooh, I like that. Kirk Tomato says the Dark Lord could have been someone Dickensian, like Scrooge or Bill Sikes. I like that idea. Dark Lord, a Dickensian bad guy, Dickensian Dark Lord. Like, I definitely like the idea of a Scrooge. I'm trying to figure out how do you supernatural that, right? If it's a Dark Lord, it's really got to be somebody who could kind of reign over this very gothic city. If there's a secret order of vampires and werewolves and potentially hags, like, because I think, like, a Scrooge Dark Lord is awesome, but what's the context, right? Like, what is their, are they because, like, you could just say that they're a mortal person, which is interesting because it plays on Von Richton being immortal, but you almost want the Dark Lord to be in contrast to that, right? I like the idea of Scrooge as an inspiration. That feels very fun and very Victorian, right? Like, classic. Now I'm imagining it's Michael Caine, right? Like, Michael Caine, the Dark Lord of Falcon. I can't get him out of my head now. Okay. But smoke from chimneys, hansom cabs, wet cobblestone streets, right? Like, extensive sewers, presumably. I'm just kind of trying to, like, get the mood. Extensive sewers. There's definitely, like, a kind of gothic-y, like, again, I'm thinking about Penny Dreadful, right? Like, there's a gruesome kind of blood-drenched Victorian, gruesome, blood-drenched Jack. Because the other option for because like I think we could have a Scrooge character. I like the idea of a Scrooge character. The other option for a Dark Lord, there's one that's is Jack the Ripper, right? Is like the kind of serial killer who stalks the streets. Scrooge industrialist whose factories spew poison and spread his influence. Like, I'm not opposed to it, but like he feels like such a mortal man. You know what I mean? Like, what is it that, like, if Von Richton has to go on a... Ooh, guys. Oh no, we could definitely put some of my weird politics shit in here. Oh no. But, so I was thinking about Scrooge, right? Like, if Von Richton has to go on a like, Batman-style training crusade to go teach himself how to be a monster hunter, right? And if he's a vampire hunter predominantly, it feels like Scrooge can't just be like an evil man, because then you could just shoot an evil man, right? He has to be more baked in. Like, it's silly just to say like he needs more powers. He'll be a fiend. That's cool. What are the natural fiends that gets money over the blood wars? That's cool. But like, there is an interesting symbol with the idea of if it's Scrooge an industrialist who's like a money lender or a businessman, right? That like, what is he doing? But he's sucking the lifeblood, right? Like, it's the idea of like an industrial capitalist as a vampire is pretty fun. And like, you know, I can get my dumb fucking anti-capitalist bullshit in here. But I like that idea. Like, I feel like if you're going to make Scrooge a supernatural creature, right? If you're going to like extend him out to the most gothic interpretation of him, like the most monstrous interpretation of Scrooge, he would have some power to drain life or to do whatever, right? Like, it's financial in a certain sense. But the idea of like bah humbugging about like there's a China Mieville novel that talks about undead, like vampire society, and the notion of like, it's called the gore tax. I would probably just call it the blood tax. But that like Scrooge, or that like the leaders of that society, rather than paying gold, you pay a little bit of blood, right, to keep the leaders alive. And there's this interesting idea of like, yes, the vampire is scary and powerful because it has all these abilities, but it also has a bunch of weaknesses, and you as a person possess the thing that it needs, right? So this the collective action idea of like, well, wait a minute, you know, he lends years of your life. That's kind of cool. I like that too. Yeah. But the idea of saying that like, if there's an inherent like tax that everyone has to give a certain amount of blood, right? It reminds me a little bit of Anno Dracula too. I don't know if anyone's ever read that, but that's a really fun one where it's like a spiritual sequel to Dracula. I think it's actually a direct sequel to Dracula, but the conceit is that rather than going after Mina Harker, Dracula went after Queen Victoria and like basically enthralls her, and then gets installed as the prince consort, and then vampires are like, you know, a thing in society, and it becomes this like fashionable thing for people to do, is to get bit and to drink blood and live forever. And like, it's this alternate history of like what happens if Dracula actually took over London. But yeah, this idea of paying, you know, blood, or whether it's years of your life or something like that, right? That like is really interesting because it plays into this idea of, you know, what is almost like a Bong Joon-ho like Parasite idea. Like, what is a rich person if not that's cool. Kirk makes a connection to lending years of your life also has connotations to the portrait of Dorian Gray. Yeah, that's cool. Maybe it's that. So he's this. So maybe I think he's gotta be like a warlock, or I think the thing that's hanging me up is that like I want to put him in a little box, or them, I should say. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. I'm imagining a man because I'm imagining Michael Caine. But like, you know, is it a fiend? Because like a fiend wouldn't get imprisoned. A fiend is evil and does evil. It has to be somebody who chooses to do evil, right? It has to be somebody who it has to be like a mortal who makes a choice. Like Strahd is just a guy who then becomes a vampire out of this sort of like unrequited lust for Tatiana. You know, it's this like weird male gaze, you know, toxic masculinity thing. Like, I love the idea of it being about like wealth, you know, and privilege, kind of like, not privilege in the sense of like, but again, that capitalistic, like, or exploitation is maybe the word I'm looking for, exploitation. This is what I mean. Like, we're sitting here talking about like bread and like ways and means. Like, the kids don't care. It's cool for me. Like, I have to be interested in it too. So if we're gonna go with the Dickensian, like, kind of Scrooge like Dark Lord, like, he lends people years of their life. I almost want to do she just to make a contrast with Von Richton, but I can't get Michael Caine out of my head. It's evil Helen Mirren, right? He lends people years of their life. Like again, it's tricky because I don't understand, like, the Dark Powers gave him this ability, so he's just like a bookkeeper. Like, he doesn't feel like he has like the iron fist power he would need to have for Von Richton to like go on a Batman crusade to figure out how to beat him. Like, you could do an LXG Dorian Gray thing where, like, because like, yeah, is he leasing out lives, right? Is he giving them to people, like extra years of their life? He lends them. So then so he has to be immortal. Is he an angel? Right? There's a fallen angel in Curse of Strahd, the abbot, right? Like, is he an immortal creature that is lending out years to people, right? Because he has immortality, so he can just give it away. I kind of think that's cool. He's like a divine being, like a fallen angel that ended up trapped here, and that, like, yeah, that's kind of fun. I just keep hearing, there goes Mr. Humbug, there goes Mr. Scrooge, like, in my head right now. This is my evil villain, right? I love it. It's great. I can't get the stupid singing vegetables from Up a Christmas Carol out of my head. Yeah, if he's like an immortal being that lends, there's an immortal being that lends people years of his life. Like, it doesn't feel quite like evil enough, though, right? It feels like he has to be like, what happens when you, like, how does this work? Like, he lends you years of your life. Does he lends you extra years? So it's like, these are people who want to live longer, right? I mean, you could do like a weird double standard thing where it's like, what if, okay, if he's an industrialist, if he's an industrialist, he's an industrialist who, whose factories choke out the sky, fill it with pollution, people get sick from this pollution, and then he lends them additional years to live. It's kind of complex, right? Like, it's kind of this, like, I like the weird capitalist scam of it, but in terms of just saying, like, if I'm explaining this to 12-year-olds, right, like, isn't it quicker and easier if he's just an evil vampire, right? Like, people get sick from this pollution and he lends them additional years to live. Like, let's entertain the vampire, like, blood tax for a second. If he's a vampire, he collects a blood tax from everyone in the city. But then it just kind of stops there, right? Like, we could be taking years from mortals to lend to other mortals. Yeah, okay. This is so dense. I don't hate it. I'm just trying to figure it out. Right? So he's taking years, because then he's just like a middleman, right? If it's like, I'm plucking them from you and giving them to you. So, like, he has to have goods that he is, like, he is giving. So maybe he's taking it from poor people and giving it to rich people, right? Because, like, who would he be taking it from? He wouldn't be doing the opposite. He wouldn't be taking it from the wealthy and giving it to the poor. He'd be taking it from the poor and giving it to the wealthy. I like the idea of age, though. I think age is interesting. Hunter's got something. Yes, but I like the idea of age, of, like, someone saying that, like, I'm 14, but they look like, 40. because they gave up. Yeah, they are 12. This is what I'm wondering. If simplicity might be where it's at. I kind of wonder if something simpler is better. Like, I don't think this isn't awesome. I do think it's awesome. I'm just trying to figure out how do you make this, because this is all like lore. Like, none of this is in the game. You know, this is all stuff that happened before. Like, so here's what I'll say. Here's what I think we do. I think we say that Scrooge exists, right? I think that this character, maybe these are the hags, because that feels super hag to me, right? Super hag. This feels like a deeply hag thing to do, right? Is to make these kind of Scroogian bargains. I absolutely think there's a coven of hags that are like evil moneylenders. Yep. So let's go under factions, because then we can just make the Dark Lord someone a little simpler, you know, just for the purposes of the story. Because, like, it's such a cool idea that, like, if it's all in the past, they're never going to interact with it, right? So if we say that these are the hags, then this is a thing the hags can do, right? Kirk says, yeah, maybe he takes the youth from the poor and they get food money but become old and give it to the rich who say, that's great. Yep, there it is. There you go. Nuker Wolf says, so the ones Van hunts after could be people that kept the city going, like the hag was a doctor that was healing, but started to take territory to protect their area. Yeah, I think the ones that it's like all the underlings beneath whoever this person is. Yeah. So the hags are like Dickensian moneylenders. So they offer, yeah, so their trade, right, is that here's how their business works. I think that's actually great. Get rid of all of this. This is cool, but I think that making them the hags is what works. Age isn't scary. I think it would be scary if they were like, they saw children who looked old, right? Like, or if that happens to them, I think it could be scary. But you're right. If it's a side thing, it's maybe not as bad. Okay, so here's the business. The hags will lend money or food or whatever. The hags will lend money or food or like wishes even, right? The idea of like a Audrey 2, like, what do you want? It will happen for you, right? Like, and in exchange, we just need a year of your life. So give me a year of your life, and then this good thing will happen, right? But then, like, you know, because it's a monkey's paw, that good thing always, it's like about what they were. Like, what do you want? Oh, I want, you know, I want 1 million gold, and 1 million gold lands on top of them. Like, you know, you could do stuff like that. Like, the hags always find a way to keep them coming back, right? Lend money or food or wishes to poor people in exchange for years of their lives. The hags then resell this to the wealthy who stay young forever. Yep, you got it, Kirk. That's perfect. Cool. I think that's one of the factions. I don't think that's our Dark Lord, because I think if they're off screen, it's too cool of an idea and we wouldn't get to use it. And I think it's a great way to do hags, right? In this kind of Victorian London setting. Okay, so let's talk about the Dark Lord. So I don't think it's a Jack the Ripper. I think it has to be a vampire. I think if Von Richton is a vampire hunter, like as much as it would be cool to do something a little more unique, I kind of think it has to be, and it also makes sense to me that, like, if our first plot line is the Sanguinoi, right, this like order of vampires, then he would have to immediately assume, like, well, it's got to be the vampires, right? That, like, if the previous Dark Lord was a vampire, yeah, 90-year-old man with a walking stick having a 12th birthday and saying thanks mom and dad to a 3-year-old couple. Yeah, that's scary to me too. I agree. I think that's really scary. Because, like, what if it's like you sell, like, you could also sell you could also sell years of your children's lives. That's dark. Ugh. Macabre. Okay. Although I don't know how gruesome and blood-drenched I can get this game for 12-year-olds to be. But I do think the previous Dark Lord, in order to justify Von Richton being known as a vampire hunter and going abroad to become a vampire hunter, I think they've got to be a vampire, right? Like, I like the idea of the Sanguinoi being, like, either the aristocracy of the city or being the, like, Yeah, that's kind of cool because then you get like it creates the power vacuum that you need for the hags. So if the Sanguinoi are the like the former aristocracy of the city that were driven into exile by Von Richton, then there would be mortals who would then rise up, right, to take over that position. The Sanguinoi go into hiding. So they want to live forever, right? And so they end up making deals with these hags. Yeah, I kind of think that works. So the former Dark Lord was some kind of a vampire lord. You know, maybe you make a Strahd reference. I want to find something unique about him, but I like the idea of I mean, maybe you even steal the notion from Anno Dracula, right? Like a prince consort. Like, what if Strahd escaped Barovia and married, you know, and conquered or like what if Strahd didn't settle in Barovia if he took over a city or something like that? I don't know. Whatever. But I like the idea of like a vampire marrying a landed royal and turning her court. So the Sanguinoi then are the former court of this royal, now deposed by Van Richton. What I like about that is that, like, then that means during the Vampire Lord's reign, like, vampirism would have been, like, openly acknowledged, right? It wouldn't be, it's a hidden thing now because Von Richton has drove it into hiding, but it wouldn't have been a secret to the people because you would have had the gore tax or the blood tax or whatever, right? Blood tax. Maybe you even do like an oppression thing where you have like vampires. Like I think it has to, because again we have these young kids. I think it has to like very openly and nakedly be like bad. You know, it can't be like subtly bad. It has to be like, no, you know, vampires were allowed to just stop people on the street and drink their blood. Maybe not all of their blood. Like it was illegal or whatever to kill somebody because, you know, they needed to make more blood, but vampires just basically had a total impunity to wander around. Yeah, vampires had total impunity to stop mortals on the street and drink their blood. It was maybe they didn't have impunity, but it's like a who's going to prosecute them kind of a thing, right? Like mortals were required to make regular contributions to certain vampires. They're almost like landed nobles, right? That it's like rather than like giving up coin or labor, right? Like a different noble would control a different district. Like this is my district of the city. I control these couple of streets. That means I get blood from these people at these times, right? Certain vampires based on district. It's kind of like a feudal system based on feudalism. And I like that too, the idea of like it's a little micro, but like the previous system was kind of feudalistic, and then Von Richton eradicated it. And now we go to this kind of corporations and you know the wealthy, and it has a more Victorian workhouse kind of a thing because he's removed the royalty and the nobility from the equation. That's why we have characters like the hags who are more Dickensian, because the previous regime was a lot more kind of a Renaissance or medieval, and it was defeated. Even though the time scale on that is, you know, only probably a couple of decades. The nature of the government and the nature of the society changed because you removed this old system. Okay, yeah, I think that's, and again, it's simple, right? The idea of a blood tax is something that the kids can understand. It's scary. There were vampires. There was a vampire in charge. He got rid of them. That's fine. Because it's backstory, I don't think it's useful to be that complicated, but I think we can use a lot of those awesome ideas in the game itself rather than throwing them all to the backstory. So my instinct then is I like the idea of the primary factions being we have vampires, I think we have werewolves, and we have hags are kind of the three big ones that occur to me in terms of like, you know, gothic horror. But then there's a lot of other characters I think we could play with. So vampires, werewolves, hags. But like other archetypes include things like Jack the Ripper, right? Frankenstein. And these are things that like do appear in Barovia or in other domains of dread. Like, I'm not saying that these are unique to our setting, but you know, what are some other, like, I guess you have Jekyll Hyde, but that's kind of Dorian Gray, right? But Dorian Gray, I think, is also kind of wrapped up in Dickens there with Scrooge. I'm trying to think of they're like Sherlock Holmes, right? Like, is there an ally he has who's more of a detective? Things like that. We can kind of fill some of these character archetypes out. So let's talk about the different factions. My instinct is that if we say the Sanguinoi are the kind of former court of the prince consort who once ruled Falcon, that like I almost like the idea that the werewolves were the people that like he teamed up with, or let's say lycanthropes rather than werewolves, because like he obviously still has allies with the ravens. Werewolves. Though like the werewolves might have allied with him. Could be hunters that provided food for humans at a price. That's cool. I like the idea too that like, and what they are now might be different from what they were, right? Ooh, Sweeney Todd. Yep. Thank you, Kirk. Sweeney Todd. Good one. Sweeney Todd. We'll have to find out a way to do it. Like, I could maybe imply it, but this is so tricky. Like, I told them, like, it's going to be spooky. There's spooky stuff. And they're like, okay, that's cool. And I talked to the parents about it. The parents know we're going to do spooky stuff, but you have to be very careful because, like, Sweeney Todd's pretty dark. But it's great. I mean, that's exactly the right genre. My instinct with the werewolves is that, like, with the lycanthropes, is that Von Richton, like, fomented a resistance or used them as allies against the vampire lord, right? That like he at one point had like relations with them, and maybe he still has good relations with like the were-ravens, but like there were maybe like different groups of lycanthropes in the city, like were-rats, werewolves, and were-ravens, maybe, because like were-bears feels a little big for the city, and were-ravens, right? And like maybe like this is pretty simplistic, but if it's like where ravens were essentially like good, and where rats were essentially like evil, and then werewolves were essentially like neutral, meaning that like, you know, historically opposed to the prince consort, eager to work with Van Richton to overthrow him, historically allied with the prince consort, spies and saboteurs in the city. And then the werewolves are like historically neutral, right? Historically neutral, enemies of the court, but not necessarily allies of the were-ravens. So the notion is that like Von Richton's like big coup is that he manages to get the werewolves to fight with him, right? So that way now, like 20 years later, it's not inconceivable that like now there's like still there's bad blood or like something happens, right? That like the werewolves, like I like them being positioned against the vampires because it feels very underworld, right? But I like the idea of them being still a candidate for the Dark Lord, right? Whoever is leading the werewolves or whatever, right? That it is still feasible that they would be the ones who would ascend, right? They like kind of enemy of my enemy situation, where the were-rats like, you know, are presumably defeated and driven into hiding or whatever. The werewolves like are kind of allowed to do their own thing, you know, assuming that they fall in line. But then over the course of the next couple of decades, as Von Richton, like, and especially if you want to make Von Richton be the bad guy, like, he probably, like, once they get the vampires out, he probably turns and cracks down on the werewolves right away, right? It's like, okay, great, now we need to clean house with you. And so he immediately makes an enemy of them again, right? Like, assisted Von Richton in overthrowing the vampires, but the moment the dust settled, Von Richton turned on them. Because, like, I don't think they were ever, like, good. You know, I don't think the werewolves they weren't, like, super malicious, but they're werewolves, right? Nuka Wolf says they could be hunters that provided food for humans at a price. So the tricky thing about that is that I want to keep us in the city. So the question is, like, where does that come from? You know, like, they can't leave the city. I like the idea. Ooh, let's put the Vistani in here, too. Yep. So the Vistani then are, like, the people are, like, merchants and traders bringing goods into the city. They have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, right? Or at least maybe in returning, in reestablishing the old status quo, because now, yeah, maybe they're currently hunters. Yeah, interesting. Because the werewolves, like... Yeah, okay. So, when under the reign of the Dark Lord, the werewolves hunted the citizens, which put them at odds with the vampires who needed those citizens, for blood. Right, and they made them potential allies of Von Richton's, right? When the city was freed, Von Richton forbade them from hunting the citizens, and they were forced to hunt outside the city. Right, so because when the city is freed, the mists dissipate, and the rest of the countryside and everything returns. Right, so then they can go out and they can hunt and they can do whatever they want in the wilderness, right, and then come back to the city, and it's not a problem. Like he probably has to crack down on a couple of werewolves, but for the most part, like, things, you know, are tense between them, but like he doesn't eradicate them because they're able to go out into the moors or whatever and hunt their prey and do their weird pagan shit, and Von Richton allows them to do it, right? But then when the new Dark Lord rises, the mists encroach the city again, and the werewolves are forced to return to hunting citizens. Yeah. So again, kind of makes them candidates again. Like, they're back to killing the people of the city. Okay, that's cool. I like the idea of the Vistani, like, kind of they were making a mint before when the Prince Consort ruled, because they were the only ones who can come and go. The Vistani's, like, kind of power is that they can travel between the domains, you know, without like, unlike anyone else, right? Like, the Vistani are the only ones that can move between different domains of dread. So if this city is just an urban sprawl, right, then it is cut off from other places. They can't bring in food and they can't bring in supplies, and so the Vistani kind of become this essential lifeline, funneling in things. Like in Barovia, they can conceivably grow food or grow wine or whatever they do. If you're in a city, there's only so much that you could do, right? So they have this, like, mercantile glean maybe in Falcon that they don't have in other places, because the city is dependent on supplies coming from outside. Okay, I think that's cool. I want to talk about the vampires a little bit. So they were, like, the court of the Prince Consort who took over, right? I mean, I think you could really do a Von Zarevich thing where, like, he was a visiting dignitary or something who got tired of, like, his provincial backwater and took over. Because I think it would be kind of fun to use some of the characters and names and stuff from Curse of Strahd, because several of the players have played it. So it might be kind of fun to say, like, the old Dark Lord was Strahd, right? Like, And they'll recognize, like, oh man, this is cool. It's like post Curse of Strahd, this story, right? I mean, he can call himself the prince consort or whatever, right? But like, there was once a queen or a princess or a duchess or whatever of Falcon, and he, you know, romanced her or did whatever. If you really want to, you could say that she's Tatiana. You know, you could reskin the whole thing. But the Sanguinoi are his court, right? The court of blood, or the Sanguinoi, are vampiric courtiers that once attended on the prince consort. Ooh, yeah. So what if the current matriarch is the original, like, monarch? You know, that, like, because then that's a very easy assumption for him to make, is that if he kills Strahd, if Von Richton kills Strahd, but, like, Tatiana escapes, right? Then he can, like, Von Richton, when the Dark Lord returns, Von Richton can immediately assume, oh, it's Tatiana, right? It just transferred over to her. That's clear, right? Yeah, I think that's cool. When Von Richton overthrew Strahd, Tatiana escaped, whisked away by by her ladies in waiting or whatever, right? Her ladies in waiting. For years, she lived in hiding with only rumors of her survival. Van Richton was vigilant, but had his hands full. With other threats. When the city falls back into the domains of dread, he immediately assumes it's her. He immediately assumes that Tatiana is the new Dark Lord. Yeah, I think that's cool. I'm into all of that. So let's maybe take a look at some of these other archetypes. We have our hags, right, who are the Dickensian moneylenders, like Scrooge. We have Jack the Ripper. Ooh, Phantom of the Opera? Yeah, let's get Phantom of the Opera in here. Phantom of the Opera. All these Yogg stereotypes too, right? Like, there's never a Jack the Ripper, but Frankenstein is Dr. Hubert. We have Phantom of the Opera is Phantasmagoria. I could just put Phantasmagoria in there, honestly. It's kind of fun. I guess our vampire in All Hell Yogg is a Nosferatu. You know, he's much more of like a wall crawler than he is a prince consort. Okay, so Jack the Ripper. So it's a serial killer. The difficulty with a serial killer is that, you know, it's deeply gross and visceral and horrifying. And I think it's probably too dark for the kids. So is there some version of Jack the Ripper that we can do, right? That's like not quite so gory and yucky. You know, like the idea of there being someone like stalking the streets at night, like a lone agent out there doing stuff. Ooh, what if Jack, like there are rumors about someone called the Ripper or something, right? Like killings in the street or whatever. This might be too dark too. It turns out though that this is Von Richton hunting people who might be associated with the new Dark Lord, right? That like, it's not just, ooh, maybe he rips out souls? That's kind of cool too. Yeah, alternate. Does the Ripper rip out souls? Because like, yeah, it could be a lich, right? That's kind of nice. At least find only the victim's shadows. Yeah. Is it a lich? I mean, you know, these are low-level characters, but, like, that's what a lich does, right? A lich, like, consumes souls. And that's a very Barovian idea, too, right? These people that don't have them. My other thought is that it's Von Richton, and I think I might do that in another context, but because these are 12-year-olds, I don't think we necessarily want to have killings. But yeah, the idea of Kirk is exactly right. The idea of them being, like, soulless is a great way to have the sense of, like, oh no, the killer struck again. The Ripper struck again, but it's a soul Ripper, right? And they leave them, like, catatonic, which is scary, but it's not gory, right? It's not horrifying in the same way. So I like that idea. Yeah, there's somebody out there who's stealing souls. And you could just say, like, oh, it's a lich. I'm not sure what the context is. Ooh, leaving the victims maybe stitched up or kind of like button eye. Ugh. That's pretty horrible. That's pretty horrible. Yeah, I like the idea of them having their souls ripped out. We could maybe do something with Coraline with Frankenstein, right? Maybe there's a way, rather than being like stitched up body parts, if it's kind of like making dolls out of people, you know, is pretty spooky. Like, I like the idea of recontextualizing a lot of things from Curse of Strahd. So, like, Blinsky, right, from Curse of Strahd, who's, like, the sad toy maker. You can kind of do him as, like, a Frankenstein-esque figure. Because I think they do that with the Abbot a little bit in Curse of Strahd, because he's got, like, the abbey full of mongrel folk, you know, who are, like, kind of Island of Dr. Moreau sort of characters with, like, you know, a frog's foot and you know, a goat's horn and stuff like that. And the Abbot, I believe, has specifically stitched up a flesh golem to look like Tatiana. So I like the idea of the Ripper being a lich. I think that's cool. I mean, you could do like an energy vampire thing too, but Frankenstein then. Is Frankenstein like a doll maker? Is Frankenstein... Because, like, flesh golems are a thing, but they're, again, kind of yucky. You know, it could be like a wax museum or something. You know? I'm trying to think. I like the button eyes, because that's very weird and spooky. That feels very fey to me. That feels like something that, again, like a hag would do. But, like, Frankenstein's thing is that he is a scientist, right? He's trying to create life. He's, like, obsessed with the idea that life is just, like, a chemical or an electrical reaction. And so he's trying to do that. Like, I don't, like, hate the idea of something similar, of, like, a mad scientist. I'm trying to think if there's, like, a way to do a little bit more of a fairy tale thing, like you're suggesting, Kirk, with the button eyes and, like, a Frankenstein character, where they... We can come back to it. The idea of Sherlock Holmes is interesting to me, too, because he would sort of feel like an ally, right? But because it's a gothic horror story, like, what is the weird twist on it? I mean, Sherlock could be the one who knows, right? Like, if you want that, you could do it as she has figured it out. Ooh, what if Sherlock Holmes is Dick Grayson? Van Richton's former apprentice, now a consulting detective, right? What if it's like, you know... He left. I mean, you could do Esmeralda, honestly. Esmeralda. After some beef, they split up as going to start their own agency. Like, because I like the idea of... Yeah, you like that? I think that's cool. I like the idea of them being the only one who can immediately figure it out, right? That it's that Riddler thing. Ooh, Sherlock is trying to cover it up? Oh, because I had the opposite idea, that Ez is trying to, like expose Von Richton. Trying to cover it up is interesting. Oh no. Like, so they're still loyal in that case. Because my thinking was the opposite, is that, like, Esmeralda is the one who will, like, who could reveal it. Like, if they need someone to help them put the pieces together. Do you know what I mean? But that's kind of the purpose of Esmeralda. But trying to cover it up is also very dramatic. Not sure how you would. Because I think it's just like a logical deduction. You know, it's just like, look at what he's doing. Look at the stuff. Because that's something else we should do too. We should talk about, like, what kind of actions is Von Richton taking, and, like, you know, how does he qualify kind of as the new Dark Lord? So after some beef, they split. Because my original idea is that she, like, leaves at, like, they work together. They defeat Strahd, and then Von Richton retires, and she kind of goes out on her own and does her own thing. And then when this happens again, she rolls back into town, right? Maybe she's a Vistani. So, like, the idea for having one of those, like, one of the, like, the Von Richton carts, right? Because he's got one famously in Curse of Strahd. And, like, I'm imagining Christoph Waltz in Django Unchained, right? With the big stupid tooth. Like, the idea of her rolling into town at some point in her cart, you know, like the idea it's like a traveling consulting detective firm, and she goes around and solves mysteries in her little, like, stagecoach. She's a Vistani that he adopted while out training to become a vampire hunter. They worked together to overthrow the prince consort, but there was some beef between them that never resolved, and when the city was freed, she took her leave. Now, when word reaches her that Falcon has fallen, she returns to get to the bottom of things. So I think she's like a character you can bring in later, right? That, like, Von Richton can maybe talk about her, or he can be kind of evasive about her, but then she can eventually arrive. It's like, oh shit, you know, it's like the OG vampire apprentice, right? Like, I think that's kind of cool. Whether or not she's there to, like, cover it up, or whether she's there to reveal it, I'm not sure. So we can kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. But I think that's the concept, right? That she's a detective, and she has, like, some of his skills, but she kind of went in a different direction with it. Sweeney Todd is tricky because it feels like, ooh, what about this, you guys? What if the three hags are three different characters? What if we have Scrooge, right? And we have Jack the Ripper, and we have Sweeney Todd as three different characters, and they're all hags. Those are the three different members of the coven, right? Because then, like, Sweeney Todd is kind of already baked into Curse of Strahd, right? The kids get ground up and then put it in these pies. Like, that's already there. So that's pretty easy to port over. But then what if we do a thing where it's not the kids necessarily? What if it's like there's a combination, like, what if Sherlock Holmes? What if Jack the Ripper and Sweeney Todd are working together? So Jack the Ripper is going out and is stealing souls, and then those souls are getting put either into, like, pies or into, you know, drinks. Like, it's spirits, right? That's like a bar or something like that. That it's like where what you drink are people's captured spirits. I kind of think that's cool, right? And then the other hag, I guess, is Scrooge, and in some way, like, she's funding it or whatever. It's like this little triangle of their business. I kind of like that. Alternate. She's a hag, and she steals the souls in order to sell them to her coven sister, who runs a tavern or a bakery or something. A hag who implants people's stolen souls into food or drink. Like, if it's a bakery, it's much more classic, right? the classic example. And like there's nothing necessarily wrong with like she cooks children into pies, right? Like that's very like classic, like Grimm's fairy tales. No one's gonna get on. No parents are gonna be like, "How dare you?" Like, come on, it's Hansel and Gretel. Like that's the premise of it. I guess in Hansel and Gretel she doesn't succeed. That's what she's trying to do. I kind of like the tavern better. That like she brews. It's like a brewery. She brews spirits, right? So it's more like a vermouth factory or something, right? She brews spirits made from the literal spirits of people that her sister rips the souls from. That's a weird sentence, but oh well, you get it. So grab these two then and drag them over and put them under the hags. I think that's cool. Nope. How did that happen? We gotta go over. Sweeney Todd. Scrooge. The hag lends money or food or wishes. The hag then resells this. Cool. And then we have who's the other one? Jack the Ripper. Because then it's like 3 little mini bosses instead of like, oh, we're all just together cackling over this cauldron. Like they each kind of scratch one of those itches. And the characters can go to the brewery beforehand for some other reason. They can hear about the Ripper, right? It's more like paying off this thing that they already know about. Cool. Yeah, great. So Phantom of the Opera and Frankenstein are left in terms of like gothic stereotypes, right? I don't think there's anybody else. I guess there's Dorian Gray, but we kind of have that with Scrooge. So you could do like a Faust thing, I guess. He's much more medieval. So Frankenstein is tough because, like, I feel like you need some kind of a take on it that isn't just I stitch up bodies into golems, right? Frankenstein feels like he could be another kind of potential ally, like an untrustworthy ally. That eventually, you discover some dark secret of. It's like you don't really want to question exactly what Frankenstein is doing. You could do a thing where it's like a flesh golem that's trying to make another flesh golem that like Frankenstein was defeated or killed by Von Richton, but the creature remained. But I feel like he would do the opposite, right? He would... Yeah, I like Kirk's idea about the button eyes and like the Coraline thing, but I can't get there with Frankenstein somehow. But yeah, like stitching up body parts feels a little too gory for these kids. So like, and again, it's not the thing. Here's the trick with it: is that like it's not that I don't think they can handle it. I bet they're looking up way worse stuff, right? Like I bet that they're because the kinds of characters that they made are very dark and like one of the characters murdered their family, like that kind of thing, right? So it's like it's not like the kids don't want that, but what I don't want is I don't want like the parents finding out that like because I'm an adult I have a different responsibility. If the kids want to watch a scary movie or like gory stuff, that's their prerogative. I can't be the one that introduces that to them because that's not my place to do, I feel kind of silly because it feels like we're doing like kid glove stuff, right? Kirk Devano says, if Frankenstein's goal is to defeat death, ooh, like Sally from Night Before Christmas, that's true. There are other ways to accomplish that beyond resurrection. Yeah. It's tricky because it's like, do you want like, ooh, flesh golem like guard? Yeah, that's kind of cool. I was thinking about like who's Scotland Yard, you know what I mean? Who's the like law enforcement here? I like the idea of him teaming up with Frankenstein to do that, right? That it's like Because again, it's classic Von Richton stuff about overcoming or like using nefarious means to accomplish your goal. Yeah, that's not terrible. Uses the corpses from the graveyard to help be the new guard to defend the town. The police are golems. Yeah, I don't hate that. What's the like arc here? What's the trajectory? Like, is he like a Lestrade figure where like the joke is that because they're golems, they're dumb? You know what I mean? And they're not very good inquisitives or whatever. I keep saying inquisitives because I'm running an Eberron game. But I kind of like that because it gives you that like the idea of like a zombie essentially like in a Scotland Yard like hat, right? I think is kind of fun. Again, they probably be more medieval, but like that idea of like where the cops show up and they're just flesh golems, you know. I kind of think that's fun. I'm trying to figure out what his like arc is, like where he goes. Like, does he assist Von Richton? Does he turn against Von Richton? You know, is he doing something nefarious on the side? I like the idea of Von Richton trusting Frankenstein, but like maybe having something over on him. Ooh, yeah. What if it's like, here, let me write this down. So, an unwilling ally of Van Richten's. Ooh, I don't know the Banana Guard actually. I've only seen like the first season of Adventure Time. I'd have to check it out. Yeah, it might get them to think that Van is the Dark Lord kind of hint. That's not bad at all. So here's what I'm thinking. Yeah, an unwilling ally of Von Richton, and we'll come up with a name for whoever this is. I might look at Innistrad and pluck one of those names out. Frankenstein created the Ghoul Guard, a police force of flesh golems. I guess call them the Golem Guard. I like Ghoul Guard, but flesh golems that help keep the peace in Falcon. Twist. Van Richton has a locket or something with the trapped soul of Frankenstein's love. Like, he's essentially blackmailing him. Twist. Maybe it's because like remind me, it's been a long time since I've read Frankenstein. Like, Frankenstein wants a wife, right? Frankenstein's monster wants a wife. Frankenstein is in love with Lily or whatever her name is. Like, the idea of like if you do like a Dr. Freeze thing, right? That like Frankenstein's wife died. Frankenstein's wife died, and he, you know, made her into a flesh golem, like a classic. We can even just do Dr. Hubert. Honestly, that's kind of fun. Made her into a flesh golem. Van Richton keeps the. Yeah, I like them being lacking empathy and insight. I think that's exactly right, Kirk. That they're just dumb. Like, they don't care, and like they will sometimes do things that are like they don't understand what can hurt a person. They don't like they're not good right at their job. I really like that, Kirk. That's a great way to think of it. Is that like they're merciless maybe, but I like lacking empathy and insight. I think that's the right way to go. Because like merciless is like there's so many evil conniving people. Like the idea of like these guys are on your side ostensibly and they could maybe help you, but like even in kind of like a noir story, the police are always kind of like bumbling idiots. Like in the best case scenario, the police are like incompetent, right? The worst case scenario is that they're corrupt, but I don't think they're corrupt. I think they're just incompetent. The idea of like Frankenstein only working for Von Richton because Von Richton has something over on him, right? Von Richton keeps the flesh golem in his, you know, safe house or smuggled away somewhere, right? That like he in some way like has something over on Frankenstein. Frankenstein doesn't want to work for him, but he has no choice, right? And then obviously that at some point slips. Like Frankenstein steals the thing back or breaks into Von Richten's lab. Like I like the idea that if Von Richten is holding on to the flesh golem, somewhere in his house, that like the party might see it really early in the campaign and not really put together what it means, right? That like you see like Sally, you know, from like David says from Night Before Christmas, like, you know, there's a woman in a glass case all stitched together, and it's got like a locket on. You might look at that and immediately think, oh, that's like Von Richton's love, and he got Frankenstein to do that for him, right? But then you later see that, you know, Frankenstein has the other half of the locket, or he has make some comment about it, right? Like you later learn, oh, that's what that is, you know? Yeah, I think that's cool. Ooh. What if it's a heart? Is it simply her heart? Does the flesh golem not love him because Von Richton stole her heart? That's kind of cool too, right? That it's not the whole thing, it's just one part of her, right? Yeah, that's neat. I'm into it. Okay, cool. You could even do that thing, maybe it's a little gory, but you could even do that thing from, I think it's BioShock Infinite, where they have those like big mechanical dudes, and they have like the visible like heart tank in the middle, like something like that, where like the Ghoul Guard has that, where you can see their hearts. And so there's one there that doesn't, you know, that won't animate because it doesn't have a heart or whatever. Okay, cool. Love it. And then lastly, let's talk about Phantom of the Opera. So my instinct is just to pull, if we're going to use Dr. Hubert, I might just pull Phantasmagoria as well from All Hail Yogg. So Phantasmagoria was the Phantom of the Opera in Dungeons & Dragons. She was an evil bard who made a deal with Yogg to have, like, who was like a failed composer who made a deal with Yogg to become, you know, to be granted this like evil, sinister musical talent, right? And then became like the sensation of the big city where she lived. You know, big sweeping blokey horns and all these ridiculous costumes she would wear, and all kinds of, you know, all of her spells and stuff were specifically kind of Phantom of the Opera style things. So she could do mimicry, and she could teleport around, and she could, you know, a lot of sonic things like thunder wave and things like that. You know, the immediate instinct is that, you know, what's the entertainment in the city? There's some kind of an opera that everybody goes to, and, you know, rather than having the Phantom of the Opera be hidden, it's like they're the maestro, like they run the place, right? But then it's maybe it's like neutral ground or something like that, right? That like the theater is in some way, you know, a central hub or a common place for the people of the city. I like the idea of there being, you know, some kind of gruesome Grand Guignol kind of element to it, if you think about Penny Dreadful, right? Where it's like about these like horrible kind of Penny Dreadful sort of stories that are shown, right? It could be a place. What if it's like the theater run by Phantasmagoria dramatizes the history of the city and the events of the campaign. Like maybe there's a plot here. But what they're really seeing is the actions of the story as the city perceives them. Right? So there can be a play about the serial killer, and there can be, you know what I mean, like that kind of a thing, where it's like it could just be the mirror onto which they see the story. Maybe we could put a plot there if we need to, but I think that's enough. Okay, guys, yeah, it's 3:30, so we could do another half an hour. I'm getting a little spun out, I think, but I think this is great. Like, so many cool plot threads we can pursue here. I'm really into it. I think there's so much depth already after just sitting down and kind of saying, how do we get all of these different kind of Victorian Gothic plot beats out? Yeah, I'm into it. I feel like that kind of covers me for today, because I'm just thinking about stuff, right? I wouldn't mind maybe doing some geographical stuff, but I think I would have to look at a map of the city first. I'll have to generate one, at least a basic one, to serve for what I need, and then I can kind of start saying, like, well, okay, what's over here, and what's this, and what's that? It's definitely, like, enclosed by the mists, for sure, and I think it's, like, but, like, where was it originally? Like, you know, you do kind of a Hound of the Baskervilles, like, moors thing. It's, like, you know, in some bleak countryside somewhere. There's probably a cool river, like a Thames, that runs through it, right? Like some horrible toxic river, you know, that now has some kind of a weird effect. I mean, that might be a whole stream in and of itself, or like interesting locations in the city. But I feel like I would have to do a little bit more research before I'm ready to do that. Yeah, so I think we're gonna wind down. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm just like buzzing thinking about this. This is so cool. Thank you everyone who showed up. We had a lot of people today. We had David and Grant and Nuker and Kirk and Hunter. Everyone coming out and helping me think about some of this. It's great to see some new faces. Awesome that Kirk and Hunter both decided to swing through. Thank you so much, y'all. If you like this stream, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. We post lots of content like this. Normally we would be streaming on Thursday, but I'm off this Thursday because my wife and I are going on a little bit of a date. So I will be unavailable then. But I will be here on Saturday playing Sea of Thieves, and then Sunday for the regular world building stream. If you are interested in my content otherwise, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at ProDM Timothy. I was going to say I'm on Twitch, but I guess I'm technically on Twitch. I never use it. I just cross-post. I'm also on Discord. We have a Discord that you can join down below. It's a great community. It's really small, which I like about it. It's not one of these like big thousands of people Discords because I'm not that cool. But what's nice about it being small is that you can have conversations with people, right? It's not like it's just this constant brrr. Yeah, it was really fun, David. David says some fun gothic horror talk. I agree. I'm excited to talk more about Falcon and really dive into it. But you can find me there. You can also find me on Patreon. We have a lot of content there on Patreon that goes out every week and every month. For $1, you can get access to new monsters every week and redesigned monsters from the Monster Manual. You can get access to early episodes of my podcast. For $5, you can get access to the Trove, which is a big archive of all of the different kinds of bonus content I've made, including adventures and maps and monsters and rule supplements and all kinds of stuff. So go check that out. Really appreciate it. Even if you can't do any of that, just give us a like on the video and a subscribe would be huge. But I will talk to you guys, I think, on Saturdays when I will be back. So it's a little bit long. Until I'll next be streaming. Oh, but we'll have a new episode of Thoughts from the Table tomorrow, so check that out. I'm looking forward to that one. But until then, thanks so much for coming, everybody. I will talk to you later, and happy adventuring, as always. Now I gotta pull up my OBS to switch screens. Thanks for coming, guys. Bye.